All right. Well, hello and welcome to the Photo Brigade podcast. I'm Robert Kaplan. We've been back. We're back from about a month or so break from the holidays. Today, I have Josué Rivas with me. How you doing?
Great, man. Just drinking this.
Just chugging that water before we get started. It's good water here in New York, believe it or not.
Yeah.
You'd be surprised. We get some good water here. Anyways, we're going to talk about your project, which is a really it's on the Dakota Access Pipeline, and I'll let you talk more about it and your role there, your indigenous, your heritage, your indigenous take on everything that you're documenting and so on. But before we do that, I just want to give a quick shout out as a thank you to Adorama and their event space, which just was actually renovated. If you come here next time, we got new cameras, we got a screen, we got all sorts of cool stuff coming. So I hope you can make it in here at some point to see our panels, which are going to be happening monthly. Additionally, thank you to Canon Professional Services, Tenba Bags, and Lacey. You guys rock. Okay. Josué, back to you.
Yes,
So
sir.
I'm going to go ahead, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to start a slideshow and just kind of have this in the background as we talk, all right? And this is all of your work. It's a lot of photos here, and you're actually presenting this same work. I don't know if this is a looser take of what you're presenting right now, but at the Magnum Foundation.
Yes, actually. Well, first I would like to introduce myself really quick.
Yes, please do.
My name is Josué Rivas, and I want to also acknowledge the indigenous peoples of this land that we're sitting on. Being present on. That the spirits here are hopefully inviting us in a good way.
Wonderful.
So my project. So let me go back to just basically like how it all started. And my dad's a photographer, and he actually, you'll be the first person to hear about this, but my dad's a photographer, and growing up he was an alcoholic as well. So I kind of like photography and me were not like, I had like a hate relationship with my dad a little bit. So it wasn't like a thing that I was like, yeah, like I'm gonna be a photographer. But when I got older, I got like around 20 years old, I started getting curious about it and started being like, you know what, like I'm gonna use this and connect with folks. I was really interested in homelessness in Orange County, back in California, where I'm from.
Okay.
So
you were raised in California?
I was raised in Orange County, and then I was just like, let me just use this and see what's up. And it just got me closer to folks, man, and it allowed me to, it's like a little tool, to get in there and just connect with people. So that was the beginning of it all, and started doing internships here and there, and didn't really take I didn't have a training necessarily. I did went to school for a little bit, and I had an amazing teacher, Melody Lamontia. She's amazing at Fullerton College. And
this was a college course?
Yeah, but it wasn't nothing like, she really cared, and she really like put a lot of effort, but the course in itself, as a whole, it was a very basic, So fast forward, I started working with like a lot of musicians because of freelancing for the OC Weekly, which was back in Orange County. And then I started working with this guy named Nako from Medicine from the People. It's a band. And I started going, like, shooting them whenever I could. Started shooting like festivals and stuff like that. And then I started working with him more closely, and he took me on tour. And when he took me on tour, we ended up in Denver. And then we ended up doing a sweat lodge. Have you ever?
Yeah, I've heard of sweat lodges. I've never done them. But you were on tour. What sort of tour?
Like a music tour. So he's a musician. So
got it.
I'm a music photographer. Just kind of like putting this stuff in. But this guy, Nako, he took me on tour, and he introduced me basically to these folks that would end up actually preparing me for Standing Rock, which were my Uncle Doug and a few other folks that were in that community in Denver. So so I just basically started doing that, and my life changed after that tour. I quit my restaurant job, ended up just going full time. Found my wife, ended up having a kid, and it was just like a whole transformation of my identity.
Wow.
Yeah.
So let's talk about a little bit about that transformation from going into professional photography, because that's obviously one of the things that we talk about. So it was at that point you saw that you could connect with people, you could tell a story, and so on, and you decided to quit your job, like you said.
Yeah.
And you went freelance.
Freelance, and I was just like doing like $200 gigs, in the Bay Area when I was living in Berkeley. But then what really, when I think about the paradigm of what being a professional photographer is, for example, or even what that is, like being a storyteller, like a visual storyteller, I didn't understand until this Magna Foundation thing. So before I went to Standing Rock, there was a lot of preparation for ceremonial things that were prepared that I had no idea that were gonna prepare me for Standing Rock, but I was doing them. And my uncle Doug was like, "Hey, you need to get ready. Something's coming." And it was very like bogus, not even bogus, but like ambiguous. Like what are you talking about? But then ended up realizing that this was that, how can I say, the photography and the videography and all the visuals, they were the tools,
right?
So he was teaching me how to use my tools,
right?
At that time. So Standing Rock happened, and it was like, okay, I'm ready. I'm ready, and he said, "You're ready. You're ready to get out there and do it." And I didn't understand what he meant either, but I just knew I had to go.
Okay, so for people that don't know, tell us about Standing Rock and sort of how you got in. These are the photos that we're seeing, by the way, if you're watching online. Tell us what your entry point was. You just went and started taking pictures. How did you gain access and so on?
Yeah, so
and build trust.
So I think like I said, it's like the preparation process. That was the real, the pre going to camp. That was where it was at, because it wasn't necessarily like, hey, you're gonna go out there and like witness some historic stuff. It was more like, hey, you're gonna prepare for something big. My uncle said there's a black snake coming through the north, and we need to prepare for that. So when I heard that about Standing Rock, and my uncle's like, yeah, like it's coming down. Like people are showing up. This was in August 2016. The camp started in April 2016. It was a handful of people, but there wasn't a lot of media coverage, and it's all good. But then in August, people started getting arrested. So me and my wife and my son, he was 7 months old at the time, drove from LA all the way to Standing Rock, and we were thinking of staying there for a week. Ended up staying there for months.
So your whole family stayed out there. You pitched a tent with everyone else?
No, I wish. I mean, I wish and I don't wish. I mean, it would have been great, but at the same time, we had a kid, and
oh, that's true. That'd be dangerous, as we saw what happened.
We were staying at the casino, actually, at the reservation.
I see.
And it was, it was also a journey of a lot of self-discovery too, on that end of like, how do you bring your family into this kind of environments?
Right.
But at the same time, it was a powerful thing, because my son will be able to say, hey, like I was a Standing Rock when I was a baby, and there's a lot of other things in there as well. But yeah, visually, that's so how I entered the space. It was from those ceremonial things. So I will put down like I will put down some tobacco. That was like a traditional thing that I mean, like put down some tobacco on the fire, and like you say your intention, present yourself to the land. So when you enter the camp, you will have this entrance, and then like folks will, like, two security guards, or like kichitas, they call them, like security guards, and they're like, hey, like who are you? Why are you here? Like you're here in a good way. Like they will just ask you some questions, and then you enter the camp, and it was like you entered this vortex. You're like, after a few hours, it was like, okay, this is something different that you don't experience in normal society.
Okay. So you got there relatively early, would you say? Yeah. Like and all of these photos were taken over the 3 or
7 months.
7 month period. Yeah. And for 3 or so more months, or was it the whole time that your family was with you?
She was there for me and my wife and my son were there together for like 2.5 months, and then she ended up going back home and doing the stuff. Yeah, it was pretty tough too.
I would imagine being away from your kid and your family. I have a little one.
Oh,
myself.
you have a little one, yeah. So
10 months old, and like, I just went away for a day the other day, and it was like, oh, it's awful. Okay, so we keep talking about the foundation. Can you talk about this? I guess award. What exactly is it that's going on? You're presenting your work, and tell me all about it.
So the Magna Foundation Fellowship for Photography and Social Justice program. It's an initiative by the Magna Foundation with support from other foundations to empower storytellers from communities that are not usually allowed to, or have access to tell their own stories, and empower them through like workshops and like labs through a 6-month period to be able to go back to their communities and then come back. So I'm actually at the end of the fellowship today, and we come back and present our work and get mentorship throughout the process, and really gain a lot of different networking, man. Like, I mean, if it wouldn't be for this fellowship, I wouldn't have met like some amazing people.
When did you get the fellowship? Was it after you did all this work?
So Larry Tawo, the photographer.
I know, but I don't know.
So he was a Standing Rock, like many other folks, and he ended up saying, "Hey, like your work seems decent, and I think you have something there, but like you need, you're a younger photographer, so let's get you some help. So he's like, I think you'll be good for this program. So he encouraged me to apply. He helped me with the application process, and he's like, look, this is my first time like me doing anything like this. So he's like, check it out. Like this is how I think you should do it. This is your angle.
Okay.
So yeah, I ended up getting the fellowship out of, I think, probably like 600 folks. It was 9 of us that got the fellowship from different countries around the world, and yeah, we ended up coming here in June for a few weeks, and then.
And does the fellowship mean, is it a financial help with the project that you're doing, which is this?
Yeah. So there's a small amount of money they give you to go back and work on your community. Okay. But the more support, like for example, my project, this is just in photography, but my project is a multimedia project. Right. So I have video incorporated into it. I have I have a website actually that I created. It's called standingstrongproject.com.
Standingstrongproject.com.
And it's gonna be live pretty soon after this fellowship. Okay. So it's more like an interactive thing, because one of the biggest takes that I got from this fellowship was like. Working with Fred Richen. I don't know if you know Fred Richen. I don't. He's just a thinker. He's a editor. He used to be an editor. He used to the ICP. I think he used to be there as well, like the dean of ICP. But anyways, what he is proposing is he's saying we're entering a paradigm shift in storytelling and in photography. It's not the same old, the good old years of like, the Frank Cappas. Yeah, Frank Cappa, right? What's his name? Yeah. So I'm super right.
Robert Cappa?
Robert Cappa, there you go. So like that era, like that was great and that was useful at that time. But like how we're going to make impactful photography and storytelling like in 2018, you know what I mean? So what a lot of his talks were like mind blowing, dude. Like I was like, okay, this guy's proposing something that is like a paradigm shift in the way, almost like evolving with the times, basically. And how do we use those in, for example, social media? Like, he's like, you can just have photos of your dog and your cat or whatever, or you can actually create, engagement. Sure. So that's kind of what the project is about. It's like there's a lot of layers to it.
Okay. And so when you went here, were you working for a publication? Were you like, what was it that kept you? I mean, obviously you were having quite an experience, but we got to afford to be gone, right?
Yeah,
how as a business person, how did you sustain staying out there?
So basically I worked with some NGOs. That was really helpful. There was a lot of support for NGOs at Standing Rock. So some NGOs hired me for like in a two-week period and document, create video content, stuff that they just needed to be able to like put out whatever they need to put out. But a lot of it honestly came from like personal donations. Like somebody would be like, "Hey, here's a couple $100." Like actually a lot of my equipment got damaged, like was gone from the water cannon night, which was November 20th. So I had I had a film camera actually, which I can't really see the photos on this slideshow, but I just started shooting film because I was like out of my other camera. And then somebody's like, hey, like one of the musicians that I work with was like, hey, like here's money for the camera, like come back and like we'll work it out after you come back from Standing Rock. So there was a lot of support. Like I think that the movement in itself was like, hey, like you're out, because my work was a little different than most of the things that were coming out of Standing Rock. I think it was just kind of like telling you alternative narratives that you don't often hear, like the whole thing with protesting. Like a lot of folks I started working with like other outlets. I started working with outlets and like, no, we need to call them protesters because they're protesters. Like, oh, hold on, like I need to teach you something. So like I learned that like they call themselves water protectors because the women carry water when they are pregnant, and they are the guardians of the water traditionally in that culture, and the men are the guardians of the fire. So there's a reason why they call themselves water protectors. So you can really just call them protesters. Right. So it's like there's a lot of that like language, and narrative and reclaiming that, it's just being like, hey, like hold on, you've been telling my stories for a long time, like let me tell you some of my story.
Right. So that gets me to, I just want to, this is part of your bio. You say that you're a visual storyteller working at the intersection of art, journalism, advocacy to challenge the mainstream narrative about indigenous peoples. So, that's a sort of a different route than a lot of people that I often have on the podcast. I'm from the journalism world, but I do a lot of corporate work now. So everybody does different things and so on. Can you tell me a little bit more about what you mean by sort of challenging the mainstream about it?
So And I'm gonna be completely honest with you. Like before this fellowship, I had a complete different idea of that statement than I do today.
Interesting.
Very different. I think that that at the root of it, the spirit of that statement is basically saying, look, check it out. We've been seeing indigenous peoples from the lens of like Edward Curtis, and creating all those images of indigenous people, like the vanishing race, and
right.
And that's one paradigm, and then other people's paradigms, and then we can actually like shift that. We can actually enter a different place. Where we have people telling their own stories and bringing a balance into this, in the who gets to tell the story. So like it's not necessarily saying like only people in indigenous communities can tell the story, but saying let's bring it back to balance, because the truth is like there's like 0% almost. I mean, there's like 5 people that I know that work in mainstream media that are native, that identify as native, and then the rest, and the assignments go to everybody else. So it's a different lens, it's like
sure,
just in general, like it's like a different lens. So I think that bringing balance to that out of balance thing, and then working together to, I think, ultimately heal and have reconciliation, because I think that's what we need as humanity, just in general. Like if it would, hopefully in our lifetime, and by the end of our lifetime, we'll be able to be united, right? As peoples, like it doesn't matter where you're from, who you are, we'll be just one people. But I think we need to get to that point. So when it comes to storytelling and who gets to tell the story and indigenous people stuff, like I think we just need to bring it to a balance.
Okay.
In mainstream media, that's
sure.
what I mean.
I think that there's a lot of talk about that also, in gender and so on. With respect to different races, it is. I
mean, like you have like Diversify, you have like Women's Photograph, you have like all these initiatives that are just like okay, like these folks they're doing something,
Have you considered, or is there a indigenous photo community out there, out of curiosity?
Actually, that's funny, because we actually are creating that's what we're creating along with Women Photograph. We're partnering up to create Native Photograph.
Okay.
Which will be a database of indigenous folks working on the field, and just being like, look, like if you might think there's not an option for an indigenous person, that actually is like there's this person in South Dakota, and
right.
in Pine Ridge, and like. So
you're saying that this foundation, this sort of what's it called again? The
social justice
fellowship.
Yeah.
The fellowship that you got. Your views have changed about all this.
Yeah.
Like in what way have they really changed? Like, I'm curious, because people get these and it changes their lives and their views and so on. And I'm curious if you can elaborate on that.
So before the fellowship, I think I was in my mind, and maybe talking just in general, I was talking a lot about what I was against. So I was against like another person from an outside perspective coming in into the story of Standing Rock or Pine Ridge or whatever.
Sure.
Like I was against that, right? That's my mentality. But now I came to realize through the fellowship and through the mentorship and through just that human to human contact that I've been getting for the last 6 months, I'm like, oh, it's actually about what you're for. So like, what are you for? I am for indigenous people telling their own story.
Yeah.
Like the other stuff is not like, we're making the industry as we go. So like I'm part of it right now, and then like in 5 years, like that industry will be in a different place, but like we're making it as we go. We don't have to abide by the pre-existing structures that were like put upon us, as photographers or professionals. And you can come from a place of heart. Like you can actually work and challenge these things, but it's still be in a good relationship with folks. Like even if they don't agree with it, they're like, well, that's a bunch of BS. Like why that would be dumb if only indigenous people can tell their own stories. Like, well, that's your perspective and that's great, but like I'm still gonna keep working hard. Like having indigenous peoples having a place on the table, like literally, like right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I thank you for that, because like I've been a fan of your podcast, and I was just like reaching out. Like I'm gonna reach out to him and see what happens. And this is like literally seeing the work, right now.
Well, I think that's great, and I'm happy to hear about this transformation and so on. I've heard different perspectives about Standing Rock and how it was difficult for some people to shoot and so on, and even so much as saying that. I guess that you had worked with some people also, and maybe you've had a change of heart about how you've dealt with people in the past.
Yeah, no, I mean, definitely. And I think it was like, how can I say this? Like, folks are very protective in indigenous communities. I mean, even towards me, like if I go to like the Navajo, not Navajo, but the Diné Nation, you know, in the Southwest, like I come in as an outsider, you know. So they're very like certain folks are really protective, and I think Standing Rock, like you saw it develop, like I saw it develop because I was there since such a long time, and it just started shifting into this like circus, you know. Like it's like when are we gonna get the next shot of the cop, and just like the, you know, the cop and the protester, like, you know, and then this and that, and it was like about taking. So like you know, when you say I want to take a photograph, like you actually are taking a photograph because you are taking something, or I think of it more like creating. So like I did see a lot of that. I mean, I don't, and I'm sure you heard a lot about this too. Like there is that perspective and like almost like approach of like I need to get the story, and like this is my story to tell, and like I need to like get in there, and that's very like common and very normalizing like the photojournalistic world, like you know. And yeah, so like for me it's like, well, that was back then, like I kind of forgave that and just try and move on and just keep doing my thing, because we're in the middle of this paradigm shift in this industry, I think. And I think it's gonna become gentrified, and it's gonna be a little hard for a minute. So folks are gonna be like, wait, hold on, like I can no longer be like in charge of like the reality of humanity through media. And they might not even know, you know. Some folks are just like, I'm just doing my job, you know, this is just how things go and this is the structure. But challenging the structures and working at it like from a place of love, constantly, I think that's the key, man. Like I want to see more stories from like people in Pine Ridge, from kids from Pine Ridge, you know what I'm saying? Or like, because that's usually the people, everybody goes to Pine Ridge. It's like the go-to place because it's very important to a certain degree, but it's also like the same stories, you know, you see the same images constantly. So I want to see the other side of it.
And I think it's important that everyone tells their story from their perspective as well. I mean, the mainstream can, like you say, focus on certain things, but it's interesting when you get into, because you do see a lot of like mainstream people show up at certain events at the right time. And it could feel, you know, if you've been on this project for a long time, to see people swoop in at that moment, I can understand, you know, your feelings. And that's not just there, but it's also everywhere. You see it. I see lots of even peers of mine going like, oh, there's an uprising here, uprising there, all over the world. Let's go over here and drop in and take pictures and add it to our portfolio. But it should be a bigger picture about telling a story and so on. And
I think there's folks that have been doing it. I mean, there's folks that have been doing long-term work in indigenous communities that are not indigenous, that are like, they're you know, it's a learning process, man. Like even for me, like you show up to places and the doors might be completely open, or the doors might be like, hey, like who are you and what is your intention? Or even we were talking about this at Magna Foundation, like working in your own communities is often harder than working as an outsider,
right?
Because it's like, you know, these folks, like you go and be like, hey, I'm making this article or whatever, this photo essay, and then they expect something bigger because it's, you know, it's like you're like them, they're like you, and then all of a sudden it's like you have this responsibility as a storyteller to like really push it out there in the way that honors that, and then the way that honors the relationship with your editor or whatever that is. And I'm entering that world right now, like we're developing relationships and even understanding the world. I really don't understand it yet. Like it's like editors, but then it's like there'll be a handful that they'll be receptive to the work and to the approach, and then there'll be some that will be like, you know, that's not our style, and that's cool,
right? So you're kind of figuring out where you want to fit in that spectrum. You know, you at the beginning of Standing Rock, maybe you were in this a more broad spectrum. You're coming as an indigenous person yourself. You're wanting to document this as a photojournalist. Also, you're a bit of an activist because, you know, you are an indigenous person yourself, and you feel, and you have the spiritual, you know,
and as a human, you know, like
as a human, sure.
It was Standing Rock, dude. It was like the calling of the four directions. So every human came, you know, there were folks that like dropped their job, like they were doctors, and like I'm quitting my job. I want to go there and like see what's going on, and then they will show up and like help with like medics, you know, like normal folks. Like, and I think that was the strength of it all too. Is like we can't do this alone. Like I cannot go into this industry and be like, oh yeah, like this and this and this is bad. You know, I have to come in and be like, well, I don't like certain things, but how am I gonna work together and collaborate? Radical collaborations, really, with these folks, and then see where we go. And you know, like bring a harmony to it, you know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
I think that we need that right now, don't you think? Like
absolutely. I think harmony with everybody, all genders, all races, all that. So let's move past that a bit. Continue. So what's next with this project? And does the Magnum Foundation, is there anything to do with the Magnum Foundation that this project's in? Something, you know, what's next with this project and next with you? Like, is there any, are we still working on this, or are we past this and working on next project?
Yeah, so this is chapter 1. So Standing Rock body of work was edited and compiled on the website as a chapter. So the chapter is called Awakening. So it's a 4-chapter project.
Okay.
And then the next chapter, it's gonna be identity. So, and then I'm gonna go and go to these different communities and use VR, virtual reality. And then use photography, storytelling, and engage. So basically bring disposable cameras, give folks the opportunity for them to tell their own story, help them curate something that makes sense, and then put it on the website, and really take, you know, folks in a journey, because the inspiration for this, the structure of the structure of the project was something very personal to me, which is called the Vision Quest, which is a ceremony basically for your commitment that you commit to going up in a hill and get a quest, vision. I'm sorry. And that's, for me, this is my vision quest. Like, to me, this project, in the 4 years that I'm gonna commit to doing it and the different layers of it, I hope that at the end of it, I come out with a more accurate and a more, not even more, but I come from a very, from a place where I can reveal a new vision of Native America. That's what I think it is. It's like, at the end of it, it's like something comes out of it that makes you be like, okay, cool.
Right.
Like, and it's unifying again. It's like, healing has to be the process of all that. There has to be we're gonna have to go in the process of, like, in the project of, like, like the treaties, and, like, you know, how we basically try to kill Native Americans. Like, that'll be in there for sure, because there has to be some sort of tension and some truth to it. But then we're like, well, what can we go from there? Can we come together, you know? And if we can't, yeah, then it's all good. Like, it's more questions than answers.
Sure. Okay. But, you know, so the thing that boggles my mind, just because I can't imagine spending 4 years on a single project, doing what you did in Standing Rock, spending 7 months on the ground there. Are you going to be relying on grants and so on for the rest of the time?
Pretty much, man. I mean, honestly, that's like if it wouldn't be for, like, things like the Magnum Foundation Fellowship, or these things that I've seen, like, you know, like Catchlight and Alexia Foundation and all these things that I'm gonna be applying to, like, if it wouldn't be for those things, I don't think this kind of work would be possible.
Wow. Do you see a book in the future, in your future then?
Yes. I'm gonna tell you more about that on February, early February. I'll tell you more about that.
Tell more about a book.
But
that's good. I work with a bunch of, not work with, but I'm friends with a lot of book publishers, people that do things different ways through self-publishing. There's Kickstarters and all these different things. So it'll be interesting to see what you do, and hopefully you'll keep in touch with me on that.
Man. Yeah,
and help promote it and so on.
Because it's like you know, like I said, the paradigm shift it's happening. And also in how we use, you know, we used to print these things, right? Like, we used to print books and we used to print photographs, and that used to be useful. So, like, I'm like, can it have an impact? You know, these things, and I think they can. And also community engagement through. I want to start pasting my stuff, man. Like, with pasting my stuff in big buildings, like JR style. You know JR?
Yeah. So,
like, potentially, hopefully, working with him pretty soon, and just doing stuff like that. Like to me, that's just taking it. You know, it's like, that's Fred Richin is like, it doesn't have to be the best photography. It just has to have an impact. You know, some folks are just very creative on how they use their photography, and then it creates an impact. And that's what the whole social justice and human rights thing is. It's that I think that, it's not about the words. It's not about the photo contest. It's like, when you look at these images, like, these are people that I know, you know. So like, and those are people that I got to know really well, and there is a connection there, as opposed to the fact that, like, some folks say, you know, you shouldn't connect so much to your subjects or be too close to them. Like, I actually have no choice, because these are my relatives, you know. So in a way, the work is gonna continue with hopefully help from more foundations, but then at the same time, just hustle, man. Like, I gotta continue creating this body of work, and it's a commitment that I made for myself for 4 years.
That's great. And where are you based?
I'm in Chicago right now.
You're in Chicago now with your family and everything, and you're going to be continuing to go back to the same place in the Dakotas, or
I'm gonna go through, most likely through urban Native areas, so like Minneapolis and Oakland, in Chicago as well. That's where a lot of Native folks were sent to.
I see.
From the reservation. So there's a huge community there. The identity will be playing around that, and also, like, I don't know if I want to go to Pine Ridge, man, to be honest. Like, Pine Ridge to me is like a sacred place, and I don't want to, like, if I ever did something there, it will be people telling their own story.
Working your way to that.
Yeah, like it's like it's been done so many times that I feel like it's time for it to be a little different, you know.
I see.
So yeah.
Well, great. I think that you know, that I'm really happy that we were able to conversate about this and to hear sort of about, you know, what you've been up to and sort of your transformation from, you know, not being in the photo realm to picking up the camera, the family background on that, to, you know, taking this chance and going out to Standing Rock and spending so much of your time to and having this sort of different outlook than a lot of other people do, and in terms of the funding and how they deal with telling their stories. And I think that that's it's impressive that you've been able to make it work and have such a large body of work to go with it. So congrats on that.
Thanks, brother.
And so I think that's a good place to end it. Before we end, I just want to say thank you again to Adorama. They're at their event space. Also, this was broadcast on Adorama TV for the first time.
Oh, wow.
So it's hello to Adorama TV people who are watching on YouTube. I forgot to mention that.
And all that nice people here.
And the nice people who came here in person, as well as Canon Professional Services, Temba Bags, and Lacey. You guys all rock.
Yes.
Josué, thank you so much. It was really nice talking with you. We'll see you again next time. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Cool, man. That's awesome.
All right.
Thank you for the water.
And you get the cup, too.